right, in this lesson, we're really going to be continuing our work solving some equations and looking what that looks like with a little bit more complex equations. So we always want to start with our learning targets. So we're going to solve some simple equations and we're going to start to look at some multi-step equations. We're really going to nail this one down between this lesson and your next one as well. So keep that in mind as well. So today we're really going to just be looking at some two-step equations, and we've got 3 different examples that we're going to walk through. So in our first example, there's no fractions, okay? And what's going to happen is I'm going to walk through one example with you, and you are going to be able to work through the other example by yourself, following the steps that we've done. So when I am looking at these equations and undoing them, I want to go back to our order of operations. Way back in the beginning, we talked about the order of operations. And I'm going to have that open so that I can refer to it. Okay, so here's our order of operations. So when we are looking at solving, we're going to be undoing. So when you're just doing math, you always go from top down, right? Because this tells us to go out of order, and then we kind of do this way. When we're solving, we work backwards. We work from the bottom up. So let's look at this equation here. 6x minus 11 equals 31. So the first step that I do, if I work from bottom up, I'm going to be undoing any addition or subtraction. So I see I have some subtraction, so to undo that, I do the inverse operation, and I add that 11. So a negative 11 plus 11 cancels out, goes away. So I'm left with 6x equals 31 plus 11 is 42. So the next thing that I would undo is any multiplication or division. So here I'm multiplying. So to undo multiplying, I divide both sides by 6. So now I end up with x equals 7. Okay, so I've completely solved for this, and I've gotten my variable, my x, all by itself. So now you have an example that looks very similar. So I want you to go ahead and do this one. We start by undoing any addition or subtraction, and then we're going to undo that multiplication or division. So now let's look at this second example. And these other examples is now we're dealing with some fractions. Okay, fractions are never going to go away. We have to deal with them all the time. So here I see I have 2 different terms on my left side. And that's where I really know I'm going to follow this example, is I have 2 different terms. And they're separated by an addition or subtraction. So I'm going to follow the steps I just did. I'm going to undo any addition or subtraction first, and then I'm going to undo my multiplication or division. So to undo that subtraction, I add 12 to both sides. So I end up with x divided by 3 equals a negative 2. Well, now up above I was multiplying, so I undid that. Well, here I'm dividing. So to undo that division, I multiply both sides by 3. And then remember, here I have to multiply by whatever's in the denominator. So now I'm left with x equals a negative times a positive is a negative, and 2 times 3 is 6. So now you have one that looks really similar to that. So I want you to take a minute and do that as well. Okay. So now let's go ahead and do this final example. And we know that we can follow this final example because I really only have one big thing over on the left side. And then I'm doing some little things in it. But I have one major term. So here is where I actually have to undo that multiplication or division first, because it encompasses the whole thing. Okay, so to undo this division, I go ahead and I multiply both sides by 6. So I have x plus 3 equals 12. Well, now I'm left with 2 separate things on the left side, so I can undo what's being done to my x. So I end up with x equals 9. And now once I've done these, I can always take my numbers and go back and plug them in to make sure that they work. And that's a great thing to do. So now you need to have gone through these 3 different examples. Kind of follow along with what we did over here, but make sure that you've worked through these and can recognize where you need to start with each of them. Okay, so now we're going to go ahead and actually get this in our notebook. So back to where our last page was. Here we're going to have some solving 2-step equations. Okay, we're going to give ourselves a little bit of info down below this as well, so that's why we're going to do this right now. Let's go ahead and glue this in. Okay, just a couple of reminders, right? And we're going to talk about these every time because solving is a big, huge thing that we're going to be doing in algebra. And once we continue on with this, we're going to be solving. So we need to kind of know what it means. So we're going to give ourselves a little reminder down here. So when solving for a variable, we want to get that variable by itself. By undoing what is being done. Okay, so that's the big thing. And we're also going to, down here, we're going to just remember our inverse operations. Okay, so we're going to use our inverse operations. That's how we undo things. And we're going to look a little bit more in depth at this next time. But we want to think about our inverse operations, and we talked a lot about them already. We're just going to give ourselves some notes. So addition and subtraction are some inverse operations. One will undo the other. Another group that we have is multiplication and division. Those are some other operations that will undo each other. So they are inverse operations. And our third real thing that we're really going to be looking at is exponents and roots. For example, if I have like x squared, and if I have the square root of x, those two things will also undo each other. So they are inverse operations as well. Okay? So now that we've got some steps to solving these two-step equations, we're really going to be taking this information with our, on this last page, our translating, and to create our different equations from word problems. So here's where we're really going to start introducing some word problems, where you have to go from words to like the math, and then to kind of follow these steps and solve for it. So now's where you're going to spend some time working in your con work and also in your practice packets that you have. And as always, come find me whenever you get stuck or have questions.